Okay, hopefully we should see something. Get something working. So it'd be awesome if anyone can just drop a message into the chat. Hopefully we should see. Just to say that you can see me and hear me. That'd be awesome. Awesome. It'd be nice to know if some other people are around actually as well. Cool. I think everyone's going to be too shy to actually say anything. Hey, I got a reply. Okay, so there is a 20-second lag between stuff. I do have chat up, so if people want to ask me questions as I go through this, you're welcome to. This is completely new to me because although I've done streaming before with Richard, I've not done streaming by myself, and I've not done streaming across platforms, and we're trialing a lot of new tooling here, so this could go horribly wrong. We don't know, but yes, it's a trial. Let's give it a go, see how we get on. It's going to be awesome. So first of all, I am going to start with an apology because I'm a professional. I was going to get all decked out for Reverse Casual Friday. I had my suit all ready out, pressed and ready to rock, but I can't find my cufflinks anywhere, and without the cufflinks, trying to type and do automation framework stuff, it gets quite complicated. So unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, today should have been Test Bash Brighton, so I'm representing by wearing my Boss t-shirt instead. Boss. Yes. So we're doing that instead. Cool. So yeah, today we're going to have a little look at building a framework, an API checking framework in Java. We're going to use Rest Assured. We're going to use a bunch of other tools. I'm just going to build it on the fly. And if you want to ask any questions, if you're following along, that's awesome. But if you want to ask any questions, feel free to do that. And I will keep an eye on the chat on the right hand side. I will be sort of looking at my main screen most of the time doing coding, so I will try and sort of keep up to date with what everyone's saying. So feel free to ask questions, or if you just want to say hi to other people who are currently in lockdown, as we all are, which is pretty rubbish, but it is what it is, and that's why I thought I'd do this today, just to share a little bit of love and a little bit of knowledge. Right, okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about context. What are we actually going to be working with? Right, so let me just get my screen up. Nice one. Okay, cool. So what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be building an automation framework that is going to be working against this API that I've built, RESTful Booker. It's a free web API that people can access at any time. And basically, it just sits there running. It resets itself every 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes. But it's there for you to sort of test out any of your API automation tools. So we're going to use Java and Rest Assured today. But if you are in the Postman space, you could use that. If you want to do some stuff with REST Sharp or whatever it is that you do in Python, or whatever tool that you want to use, it can be used against this. So this is going to be our API that we're going to be working with. So we should get started. And where do we start? We start by building like the skeleton of the framework. So I'm going to be using IntelliJ, and I'm just going to change my settings. You can't see this because it's on the other page, but I'm going to remove it from Darkula, take it from development mode into light mode, because that'll make it a little easier to see. Okay, cool. So we're going to start a new project. I'm going to bring this across. Okay, so we're in the Java space. So I'm working with Java 11. And I'm using Maven. I can't quite remember which version of Maven I'm on, so let's have a quick look-see. Maven-V. Maven 3.62. So, for posterity. These were the libraries. These are the things I was using. But I'm confident that this will actually behave with future instances of Java and Maven, because we're not doing anything super fancy. Cool. All right. So we're starting a new Maven project. Let me just move some stuff in Windows and things like that, because I keep losing my chat. Oh, dearie me. Oh, dearie me. It's not going to work. Okay. We'll leave that for a second. So we're going to call this Ministry of Testing. And our artifact ID is going to be REST. Let's call it API check demo. Where am I going to save this? Let's save this to my desktop for now. Cool. Click finish, and here we go. Here is our project. I'm going to hit enable AutoImport to make sure that as I add things in, they're going to be added in. Right. So we're going to go for I'm going to go for a bit of cheating here, because I don't really want to spend all of this hour just typing in lots and lots and lots. So I'm just going to copy a bunch of stuff in from a pre-existing POM XML, because I do have a already existing version of this live elsewhere, which I'll share a little bit later, with lots of different flavors of it. So not just Java, but Ruby, Python, JavaScript, that sort of thing. But let's just paste this in. Okay, so first things first, let's change that to 11. So that's this little build section is just telling me what version of Java I should be using. So I've already realized that my old framework needs updating, because that still says 1.8. Right, let's talk very quickly through the dependencies that we're going to be using. So first of all, we need something to run our tests, okay? So I think a lot of the time when we talk about automation frameworks, we talk a lot about the tools that we use to kind of interact with things like Selenium interacting with browsers, or Rest Assured interacting with HTTP APIs. But we still need to think about what our runner is. For me, my preference has been JUnit. I'm still in the version 4 space at the moment, just because I haven't really had time to sit down and look at the new JUnit 5 Jupyter stuff. And the little time that I have spent with it, I've had some issues with it. So JUnit, that's going to be our runner. That's what's going to actually create our tests for us, and that's where we're going to inject our code to run inside it. Then we've got Rest Assured. So this is going to be our tool of choice to create HTTP requests, receive HTTP responses, parse them, do things with them. It's worth saying that by the time we finish this, you may find that actually, you might not want to use Rest Assured, and that's perfectly fine. I've done similar stuff with Spring MVC and using Spring and their HTTP libraries. Really, the way that we're going to architect this, you could drop in whatever tool that you want to create HTTP and to create HTTP requests and responses. But for now, we're going to use Rest Assured, because just out of the box is a lot easier. So we have a couple of libraries here around Jackson, Jackson Data Bind and Jackson Core. They're going to become apparent as we go through this, but basically they're tools that are going to allow me to turn JSON objects into Java objects, and Java objects into JSON objects. Because if you think about it, when we send an HTTP request, we send it as plain text. So we need to work out how to create those payloads and then send them as plain string, and vice versa. We need to take those plain string objects and then convert them into something that we can use in Java. And then finally, we got approval tests. We may get onto this, we may not, but basically approval tests is a way of asserting our information. It's a little bit different to using sort of assert in the sort of traditional way. So rather than asserting some data, we're actually going to create what's known as a gold master. And then what we do is we pull down some information, like during our test, during our check, and then we compare it against the gold master to see if those two files, the data in those two files matches, and if it doesn't, it'll fail the test. So it's quite similar to sort of visual testing, if you've come across that as well. It's the same sort of principle. Okay, so that's sort of the first point. We've got our framework nicely set up with all the dependencies we need. Let's create our first test. And we're just going to do something that's really, really straightforward, just to sort of get the JUnit side of things running. So I'm going to call mine API test. Yeah, let's call it that. Okay, so we start off with the test annotation for JUnit. We're going to do public void, and for the first one we're going to say get bookings returns 200. That's going to be our test. And just to sort of kind of drive that point home about how JUnit is pretty much it's just the runner. It's just the thing that's going to trigger the stuff off for us. I'll right click on this and run this. And okay, cool. Passes 3 milliseconds, the fastest automated check that you've ever seen, and also probably the most useless one as well. Although, fun fact, I once worked on a project where we had 5 layers of abstraction, and we got to the bottom layer, like the method that was actually doing the testing, and it just said assert true equals true. So it's fair to say the person who created that was fired. But yeah, just a little fun fact about automation there for you. Yeah, very nice. Okay, cool. So we should do something. We should get some sort of request going on in here. So this is where we're going to start using Rest Assured. So Rest Assured is quite keen on using given, when, then as sort of methods within the actual with the actual sort of call chain of things. So I'm going to do given.get, and then we are going to do, let's put the URL in, so it's HTTP. Is it HTTP or HTTPS? God, it's been a while, hasn't it? Cool. Let's just be lazy and copy from there. HTTPS RESTful Booker. There we go. And then we'll do /bookings. Okay, so let's import. So a lot of Rest Assured stuff is static methods. So we're going to import the static method, our Rest Assured.given. So this is chaining 2 methods, given and then .get. So the given doesn't really do much as far as I can tell. But the get is where the main chunk of it is. Will you be abstracting the Rest Assured code out to something like a service class? James, you're too keen, mate. You're too keen. I will be abstracting the Rest Assured code out, but at the moment there's not really much point in it because we only have one test. But I promise you, as soon as the second test is created, we'll start looking at how we can abstract this stuff out. So initially, we only have this one test, so we're just going to do response equals that. So we're going to import the response class. So you can see up here now we have a Rest Assured response class. So when we call get, and it sends that get request to the bookings endpoint. I wonder if I need to put the slash there. Let's put the slash there just in case. It's going to return me a response object, which I'm going to extract something out of. So we're going to do assert that response dot get status code. Now we could do get state. Yeah, let's get status code, and then is 200. Okay, so we are going to assert, except I can't see it doing that. Why does that not? There we go. Okay, so we're using Hamcrest for our assertions. Hamcrest comes out of the box with JUnit 4, but you can actually pull it in as a dependency in its own right. But we're going to import that. Cool. And then we're going to import that is import. And again, why does it want to? Let's do equals instead. No. Why is this not working? Anyone know what I'm doing wrong here? Because I would expect Hamcrest to say that I could have is or equals. Or is it equals to? There we go, equal to. You can tell how long it's been since I've used Hamcrest. Okay, so right, let's talk through this real quick. Our first line is going to do a GET request to the bookings endpoint, and whatever it gets back, it's going to stick in this response object. And then I'm just doing an assertion to say that it's equal to 200. So let's give this a run. And drum roll, please. Oh, got a 404. Now that could be because I've put bookings when it really actually should be booking. So one thing you should always do is actually read your damn documentation. So here I can see it's /booking and not bookings. So let's get that open. Let's give that a go. Should work, hopefully. Beautiful. 3 seconds to run. Excellent. And there we go. That's like our first API check up and running using Rest Assured and Java. And really, like that's kind of it for sort of GET request based stuff. Just by calling .get, that can be enough to sort of just get you started with creating some requests. But yeah, we want to start doing some more interesting stuff with this. And as sort of James mentioned in the chat, we want to think about like actually how we can abstract this stuff, because the problem is now if I do another test and we do this one and it's for this one's get booking ID returns 200. Now this one is obviously slightly different because I'm going to do get booking /1. So we could just copy the code like this, run this, and that's all well and good, should pass. Yep, brilliant, so that passes. But the problem is now is that we've got a certain level of flakiness here. Now, say for example, this booking endpoint changed and it was renamed from bookings to reservations. So now I have to go through all of my checks, change booking to reservation. I could, of course, just have a static like final string at the top here. So I could just control the host here. So string host equals yada, yada, yada. And then I could add the host into here. But then we're also going to run into this problem where if we have multiple classes with multiple tests, it starts to become a bit of a headache. So let's look at how we can actually start abstracting the actual HTTP calls out into their own classes so that we can create a code base that's quite dry and is a bit more resistant to some of those changes. So to do that, because this is basically a framework that's not embedded with another code base, I'm going to actually stick all of my non-test based stuff, so all like the supporting stuff, I'm going to stick it in main. So main Java, I'm going to create a new package and I'm going to call it API. And basically, like very quickly with APIs, the whole idea of URL design is that you're supposed to design things around resources. So within this API, we have the concept of the resource booking. But we might have other resources. So we might have rooms, we might have reports, we might have... I can't think of anything else. My brain dried up there. But the point being is that those are all different things. So they would be represented in our URLs with /booking or /report or /room. And we're going to kind of mimic that behavior within our framework. So in the API package, we are working with the resource booking. So I'm going to call this booking API, just to make it nice and clear that this is the class that handles the requests, the sending of the requests and the responses. Cool. Okay, so now I can do something like saying private static final string API URL equals, and then let's copy this to begin with. And put that in some quotations. Okay, cool. So we've now got a base URL for the booking API. And we can do more with this later when we start adding more API classes in. So we might want to extract out, like, for example, this bit. But for now, this is the only sort of the API that we're calling. So this becomes our sort of base URL for this class. So let's go back and let's like update these slightly. So rather than doing the get request in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually extract that out into its own method. I'm going to call this public static response get bookings, and let's import that response. Nice. And then let's just take this out and pop it in here. So we're going to say we're going to return the output of the given.get. Now for this matches with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this and call this API URL. And in here, we're going to change it slightly. We're going to change it up slightly now. So we're going to call booking API dot get bookings. Now I've chosen to do static methods here because there's not really anything specific that I need to instantiate with a sort of normal class. But you might feel that what I'm doing is heinous and horrible and I should burn in a fiery pit for what I'm doing. If you want to put it into classes and call a booking API class and start that first, that's fine. Like, it doesn't really make much difference in my mind. It's just this makes it a little bit leaner. So let's run this test again. And we're looking good because it's just calling the same stuff. And then we're going to do the same thing here, but with the booking IDs returned to 100. So I'm going to create a new method in here. I'm going to call it public static response. Response get booking by ID. And then we're going to say return get API URL, but we're actually going to add in a booking ID. And what we're going to do, so we've got two different ways in which we could do this. We could actually have a string and do booking ID that way, or we could do an integer, and then we'd have to use integer .toString to convert the booking ID into a string, which seems a bit daft. So let's keep it as a string. And let's update this. So we'll say booking API get bookings by ID, and we'll send a string of 1. And hopefully nobody's deleted the first booking ID from the API. If we run this, cool, and it's running, looking all shiny. So now what we've done is we've kind of abstracted out all of the actual making of the call into its own area, and making this much more manageable. Like I say, we can now, if, say, for example, this changes to reservations, we can just type reservations there, and then that basically propagates across all of our methods. Now, this is all well and good, but you know what we want to see is this maybe in a situation in which we reuse one of these methods. So let's create another test. And this one, we're going to find the secret teapot. Get booking ID returns 418. There is a secret teapot hidden within our API. Okay, so at the moment, if I do this and say returns 418, and I run this is going to fail. Because all we've done is we've just changed the assertion, and it's still returning a 200. And the reason why is because to get the 418, we have to send it a bad header. Specifically, we need to send it a bad accept header. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend our get bookings by ID method. And we're going to add in another call another method here called header. And I'm going to say it's accept. That's the type of header it's going to be. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign this to a variable called media type. Sorry, not variable, parameter. No, potato, potato. Okay, so media type here. So we've extended this method, this get booking by ID method now. So we have to provide a booking ID, and we also have to provide the media type that we want to accept. So with headers, we always provide a key value pair. So the key being the accept header and the value being whatever it is the value that we want. So we need to go back and we need to fix both of these checks now. So let's fix the one that we should accept a 200 from. So this one should send us a application/JSON. So do application/JSON. But then for this one, we're going to send something a bit different. So let's do text/plain. Now, if we run this, well, let's run them all together at the same time. So that passes, and that passes. Okay, cool. So what we've seen here, so our first one returns a 200 because we're sending the correct header type. Whereas this one passes because we're looking for a teapot status code 418. But this time we're sending a media type of text plain. So basically the API is designed to say, oh, you've sent me the wrong media type. I'm going to send you a silly error back. It used to be that it crashed the API, but I ran this in a workshop once for 60 people and they all found out how to kill the API. So I spent basically the rest of the workshop returning all of the APIs on because everyone kept crashing them because everyone wanted to try the bug out. And in the end, I had to beg everyone to stop breaking the API, which was really frustrating. So it's a 418 now. But yes, back to this more. I think this now demonstrates even further that what we have is the ability to create a method that interacts with one endpoint in a specific way, but we can reuse it in lots of different ways. So by exposing a bunch of parameters into the method, we can modify certain aspects of our request, but keep the other stuff static. So for example, if I didn't want people to send an accept with a bad thing, I could probably just remove the parameter and do application/JSON. Fortunately, rest assured will, I think, add the right headers out of the box anyway for this instance. So arguably you could just drop it entirely. But it just sort of demonstrates how you can abstract away your calls into a place where they're nice and clean and tidy and easy to manage, so that if you have to make any changes to them, you make them in one place and then that propagates through your tests. So that's getting requests. What about posting data, which is also quite a tricky thing to do? Because we have the additional challenge here now that if we look at our API documentation, to create a booking, we have to send this object here. So ignoring the sort of the curl request part, but we have to send this. So we have to send something with a first name, last name, total price, deposit paid, booking dates, and this is a sub-object to the main object, which poses other challenges, and then an additional needs as well. So we've got a few things here that we need to do. First, we need to extend our API, or our API class, so that we've got a booking, like a post-booking endpoint. But then also we need to be able to create the payload in the first place. So let's start by creating our test. So public void post booking returns 200. So appreciate that I'm doing a lot of asserting on the status code. If we have time, we'll have a look at more sophisticated things we can do in terms of asserting response bodies and that sort of stuff. But in this, we are going to basically do response equals booking API dot post booking. And another thing as well, I just want to sort of highlight here is that I like to name the methods clearly in terms of what HTTP method they're using. So post booking. So this is the method that it's using and the resource it's pushing it against. Again, it's really up to you how you want to name these, but it's important to name them clearly. You want to make sure that the method shows the intent of what you want to do when calling it. Okay, so we need to post booking, and then let's just be lazy and copy this and say we want it to return a 200. So using Hamcrest, assert that versus the .then syntax in rest assured personal preference. It is a personal preference. I like to keep my assertions separate from the libraries that I'm using to assert with. So, like, I wouldn't necessarily use the .then feature in. I wouldn't necessarily want to use the rest assured .then feature for two reasons, actually. First of all is because I lose control over what assertion library I use. I'm kind of I have to use whatever they're using, and that might not offer me the features that I want. But the other thing as well is I think there's clarity in terms of the checks that I create as well. So if I was to use the then function, I'd have to do sort of something like this. I'd end up calling maybe something like booking API .then and then doing my assertion there. And that doesn't read that great to me because it's like, well, where does that .then come from? Oh, it comes from the rest assured code that lives within here. So it kind of fuzzies the test up a little bit. So by using Hamcrest, I can do the assert that way. The other thing as well is like I say, I tend to use approval testing for this sort of stuff, for API testing. So to be honest, I've not even tried. So I'm not going to, besmirch the good name of Rest Assured and say you can't do you can't do approval testing within it. You may be able to. You may be able to do some sort of snapshot testing. But by keeping it separate, I can switch out my assertions with other tools and stuff. So controllability, readability are the main two factors that sort of say why I prefer to use Hamcrest over the out-of-the-box tools. But again, it's personal preference. I'm not going to say don't use one, use the other. So, right, let's come back to this. So we've created a new method, post booking. So let's go into our booking API. God, it must be really painful for all those people who actually know how to use all of the shortcuts in IntelliJ as I write this all out by hand. But I'm a little bit too creaky with all of that stuff to want to start mucking around with, I don't want to turn this live stream into Mark works out shortcuts for stuff. Anyway, post booking. Okay, so we want to post a booking to the RESTful Booker API, and we're going to need a few different things in here. So we're going to return the outcome of given. Now, when we send a post request, we always have to give it a content type. We have to tell the API what format we're sending the payload in. Now, rest assured has a bunch of quick to use methods. So they're sort of like just quick shortcuts. So rather than using header and then doing content type, blah, 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 I can actually just call content type like this. And because this is a special type of method, I can actually, rather than provide the content type as a string like I've done in the header previously, I can actually call content type dot JSON. So this is pretty much doing the same as what I did here in terms of sending application/JSON. So that's configured my HTTP request to have a content type of application/JSON. So content type, and then we need to send a body, we need to send a payload. So call this booking payload, which we don't have at the moment. And then finally we have to call when, and then we do post API URL, because we are sending a post to /booking. We're not doing a get, so we don't need to change anything here. Okay, so we need to create, so we've got our request there. That's got us all the details that we need, but we do need to send a payload along with the request. So let's build that next. So how do we get something that's typically in a string format into this request using Java? So we do this using POJOs, or plain old Java objects. So the way that I like to do this is I call it booking payload. That's the object that we're going to send. So you give it the name of booking payload. So reusing my names there. But basically this is going to be a class. And the structure of this class is going to match the structure of this JSON object that I'm going to create. So what I like to do is copy the original JSON object that exists. We're going to create a new package in here, and we're going to call it payloads. And in here, we're going to create our class booking payload. Oops, booking payload. Okay, so that's just our empty class, and we can import a class here. Cool. All right, so that's our API configured, but we still need to be able to send the booking payload. We need to create it now. But obviously it's empty, so we need to add something in. So the reason why I like to copy the thing here, oh, that's horrible. Let's nicely format it. So who doesn't love a bit of JSON lint? So validate JSON. Ooh, get rid of those strings at the end. Validate JSON. Cool. So that just formats that nicely for me. Let's close that down. Go back. So let's paste that in here, and then I'm just going to comment it out. Now, the reason why I do this is because then this almost gives me like a visual aid to work out what it is that I'm actually sending. So let's make this a little nicer as well. So now I can see very clearly what it is the class has to create. So we have a bunch of different things here. We have first name, last name, total price, and they're all sort of fairly straightforward data types to create. So let's start with those. So how we do this is we create a bunch of private variables that have the same name as, so again, like in JSON, we have key value pairs. So the name of my variable will be the name of the key in the JSON object. So this one, first name, is a string. So I do private string first name. And then what I need to do is, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a Java object that matches the structure of this JSON object. And then we're going to pass it to a tool called Jackson. And Jackson is going to basically read that class and turn it into a JSON object. So JSON needs some information around that to know, like, well, you know, what do you want me to do with this? How do I know to turn this into first name? How do I know to assign the variables correctly? So to do this, we add the annotation JSON property. So for every variable that we're going to add in here that matches every parameter in our object, we have to put a JSON property. So we'll do private string first name, private string last name. We've got to do another JSON property, and this time it's going to be total price. So this is an integer, so private int total price. JSON property again, private string. So let's just ignore the booking dates for a second. Additional needs. Cool, and that matches all those. Now we've got a bit of a challenge here because we've got this concept of booking dates here as well. So booking dates is a sub-object. So in JSON, you can have an object and then that object can have sub-objects. So the similar relationship to in Java would be that you would have a subclass. So for this one, just to make it nice and structured, we'll do JSON property, and then this time we do private booking dates payload equals booking dates. Okay, so let's come back. Well, actually, let's build this first. So before we build all the other parts to this class, let's build that class as well. So let's create a new class. We'll call it booking dates payload. And then this is what I like. This is where I start doing things like this. So I'll copy out that sub-object and I'll paste it here, because then I can see very clearly what it is this thing is responsible for. So this has 2 dates. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here and just copy some stuff across. So let's do this. Now, because I'm using dates here, I can actually use the date object in, use the Java date object in here, and then that'll actually basically build it in the way that's suited for me. So Jackson's smart enough to go, oh, you've sent a date object, I'll convert it into a date string that can be sent. Okay, so that gives us our structure. So we can now do something, well, actually we can't do anything like that yet because we still don't have any constructors yet. And we have no way of actually setting these values. So there's lots of ways we can do this, but I'm going to do it the hackiest and quickest way we can possibly do. We're going to create a constructor in which we just basically assign all those different bits in there. So I was using the generate function in IntelliJ, and that just gives me a constructor where I can just drop all the values in that I need. And then booking dates payload, we do the same thing again. Another constructor here. So we could wrap this all in clever helper functions and stuff to clean it up and make it clearer, but I don't think we really have time to do that right now. But this gives you the gist. So what we do is, first of all, we've got to create our booking dates payload first. And we'll call it booking dates payload equals new booking dates payload. And then let's add some dates in there. And again, we're going to do a little bit of cheeky cheating. Oh, no, we're just going to send 2 new dates. So basically this person is going to check in and check out at the same date because they're odd, or because they've been told that they have to self-isolate somewhere else. Haha. Okay, so that creates our sub-object. But we now need to complete the object by creating our booking payload. There we go. Booking payload equals new booking payload. So we need a first name. It's going to be Mark. I'll go for my old stage name, Winters, rather than Winteringham. His last name. They got paid £200 for tonight. They've not paid a deposit. Their booking dates are the booking dates payload, and additional needs is that they want to leave before bed. Cool. Now that doesn't quite match up. What have I missed? Total price. Oh, it's because I've not put in private Boolean deposit paid. So I missed one. Oops. So let's delete this constructor and start again. So constructor, generate a new constructor, add all those in. Boom. There we go. Lovely. Okay, so as you can see here, like I'm building the object and its relationships between one another in a way that matches up the JSON object. So we start with the sub object. Once that's created, I can create the sort of root object and drop in my payload after that. So booking payload goes in there. Everything's complete. And let's give this a run and see if the lights still stay on. Okay, running. Hooray! There we go. So just to quickly summarize, we're creating the body or the payload, the JSON object that we want to send to our API endpoint in Java by using plain old Java objects. So they're known as plain old Java objects because they don't have any functionality in them. There's no like calculations going on or anything like that. It's just a bunch of different private variables with some data assigned to it. And then using the JSON property tag, when we send this to our request, Jackson knows to turn it into a JSON object in the correct way, which is quite cool. And then we're sending that to our API class, which takes the booking payload and sends the request and returns as a response that we're asserting on. So we've got a clear separation, clear distinction of where our API exists, where our HTTP requests and responses go. We've got a clear area where our payloads, our models of our data go. And then we've got the actual test. So the test is sort of center. And then we're pulling in from API and we're pulling in from payloads. And that's really it in terms of the structure. That's pretty much how it works. But I want to do one last thing because I want to show actually how we can parse responses. So at the moment we've built a plain old Java object and we've sent it to Jackson, turned it into a JSON object and then send it to the API. How do we do the opposite? How do we take a response which has a payload and parse that and then use that information within our test, within our code? So we're going to do that with the delete booking endpoint. So with the delete endpoint, we actually have to provide a specific header. So we have to provide a cookie with a key value pair of token equals some sort of token value. Now, to create that value, to know that you're using the correct value, we have to log in first. So there is an endpoint called /auth in which we send a username and a password. And if you send the right username and password, it sends a token back, and then we can use that token in other requests. So we are going to create a test that says public void delete booking returns 201. Now, for some of you might be going, hang on, 201 is created. Why would you say created when you're deleting a booking? That's because this API is riddled with bugs. Lots and lots of weird little bugs and weird behavior. So another cool thing about that API is if you just want to practice testing APIs and not necessarily doing automation stuff, it's a good place for you to sort of start exploring the API to see what sort of weird things happen in there. So we've already seen you can get a teapot status code, but there's all sorts of crazy stuff going in there. So so for this test, I need to be logged in, and I need to take that token from that login and then use it for my delete request. So a few different things in here. So let's do some comments just to make this nice and clear what's going on. So first of all, log in and get token, and then use token to delete booking. So let's start with this first part. Let's do the login and get token part. So this is where we can start to see some interesting stuff going on with our frameworks, because we're using a different resource this time. We're using the auth endpoint. So this means that we're going to create a new API class, and we're going to call it auth API. So what we're going to do is we're going to say response equals, say auth response equals auth API dot post credentials. Let's do PostAuth. And we're obviously going to have to send a payload as well and all that sort of stuff. But let's start by building our PostAuth method. And the reason why I want to do that is because I'm actually going to, well, basically what we've got now is that if I did something like this and change this to auth, we've run into that same problem again. We've now got this root, this host part is hard-coded in two different places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class called base API. And within base API, all I'm going to do is I'm going to put the host in here. So our base URL is kept here. And what this means is that I can then go back to my auth API and say extends base API. And I can change this, so I can remove this part, and then I can do base URL plus auth. And then we need to do the same thing here as well. Base. Oh, no, hang on. We need to extend first. Extends base API. And then base URL plus booking. And let's just make sure that, yep, all our slashes are in the right place. Okay, so now that means that we have one place where we control the host. And that's quite interesting because we could put more sophistication in there around, say, for example, if we wanted to test against multiple environments. So rather than it be hard-coded, it could actually pull from a properties file or an environmental variable. Doesn't really matter what you want to do, but the fact is that the mechanism that controls which host you're going to use, it's there. You may also want to use it for other environmental variables as well. But at the moment, we're just using it for a base URL. Okay, so that's our auth API base URL. So now we need to actually create the method itself. So again, a little bit of cheatiness. Let's paste this in. Okay, so we're going to have to provide an auth payload, which we'll look at in a second. Let's call that auth payload as well, just to make it a little bit clearer. So it's very similar actually to the post booking. So send a content type of JSON, send a payload, call when, because I have to, and then post API URL, and then we'll return the response back here into here. So let's import this class. So now we need to create an auth payload. So auth payload equals auth payload. Let's just call it that. Equals new auth payload. And we're gonna, what's the login credentials? They are admin and password 123 because this is very secure. Admin and password 123. Cool. So let's create our auth API, our auth payload. So new class here, auth payload. And again, we can go back here, copy this, shove this in JSON lint again, just to make it look all shiny. Validate. Lovely. Okay, so we now need to create an object that matches this layout. Let's do that. Let's do that. Okay, so for this one, it's pretty straightforward. So JSON property, private string, username. JSON property, private string, password. I don't know why I thought that would autofill. Create our constructor. Let's import all this. Add our auth payload here. Just make sure that this is all cleaned up, so make sure that's wired in. Brilliant. Okay, so we're now sending a request, and let's just do a quick system out to see what the response is. So we can see auth response dot get body dot pretty print. So let's run this so we can just see the output of that code. Sorry, of that request. So is that all working correct? Lovely. So it worked. Woohoo, we got a response. We can see a token. Now, this returned it as a string, and this is a bit of a pain because I mean, I could use like regex to extract it and stuff, but if this was quite a complicated object, it'd be a bit of a headache to deal with. So what we want to do is actually we want to basically convert the response body back into a Java object. So to do that, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create another POJO, but this time it's going to match the model of the response. So in this instance, we're going to create a new payload. We'll call it auth response payload. Nice one. And this is very, very straightforward. So for this one, we've literally got one field. It's got to look pretty. It's got to look pretty. So we do JSON property, private string, what's called token. Now, the difference with this one is that I don't need to create a constructor because Jackson is basically going to do some magic and do all of the mapping of it's basically going to look at the string, it's going to look at the object that I'm going to give it and say, basically, can you sort of merge these two things together and then give me an object to use in a technique called reflection. Now, I don't really totally understand how reflection works. I think it's something to do with like the way that we name our variables and our methods. So I only need one method, which is get token, I believe. But basically, like in a nutshell, it's magic. And for us in this at this time, we don't need to necessarily worry about how it's doing it. All we need to do is that we got the right incantations in there. So by doing the JSON property and setting its token, when Jackson has to basically take the JSON string and map it to this object, this class, it'll know that it'll go, oh, token is that's in your class, so I'll create an object with a variable called token with this stuff in there. So how do we do that? So we do that by, we'll delete that first, and what we'll do is we'll actually create, so we'll create an auth response payload, and we'll call it auth response equals, and we do auth, sorry, no, that's terrible naming. So let's call it token object. Terrible naming there. Should be better, but that'll do for now. So we call auth response, not auth payload, auth response dot as. So this is a rest assured function, and we're saying basically return me the body of auth response as, and we do auth response dot class. So this is basically saying this is the class that I want you to use as a means to sort of understand what it is that you're getting back as a response. Like I say, reflection, it's confusing. Just trust me on it. So let's do a system out and say token object. and then we can do get token. And as you can see in here now, I can actually extract it as a string. So let's run that. Cool, so we got a string. It actually output the string. So what's happened here, just to sort of clarify again, because this is where things can get a little confusing, is that we've sent our request, our post request to the auth endpoint. It's returned a response. The response has a body in it, a JSON body. And what we've done is we've asked Rest Assured, with the help of the tool Jackson, to basically turn that that JSON object string into a Java object, which is auth response payload. And what we need to do is we basically provide this as a class, auth response payload.class, as basically as a template to say this is how you're going to fill it in. Cool, so we've got our token. I'm going to just change this slightly, and we're going to just call this token. So this will be a string token, and I'm just going to chain one thing here and just say get token. So I've slightly changed this. I've just sort of moved that previous line of code into here. So now we've got that there. So now we can use this in our next call. So we can do response equals booking, response equals booking, API dot delete booking. We're going to have to give it an ID. So I want it to delete booking 1, assuming that's still there. And I'm also going to have to send the token because it's going to use that. And then what we're going to do is, again, we're just going to say assert. Assert 201, change that to booking response. All right, so we need to create a method called delete booking. So it's going to be booking ID string token. Perfect. Right, so let's drop in what we need. And what we need is to change this to token. Let's change that to, well, we just delete all that. Booking ID. Okay. So we're creating a header with a cookie, token equals, and then the token credential here. So imagine if you're working with your own APIs and you have to authenticate or authorize in certain ways with headers. This is where you would drop the values in that would authenticate you or authorize you. And this is where, again, base API might be useful, because actually what you could do is send the token value to the base API where it could be reused elsewhere. And then finally, we're calling the delete method, API URL plus booking ID. So let's give this a crack, see what happens. And it passes. Now, the interesting thing here is that if we run this again, it's going to fail because this is not a very deterministic check. And I've sort of done that for brevity of showing you the key things with working with Java for API checking. So it's failing now because there's no booking to delete because we've already deleted it. So what I should have done is have another part here, which is create booking to delete. And when a booking is created, it actually sends you a booking ID, and we would need to extract that. So what we could do is actually create a booking, extract the booking ID, drop that into here, and then call the auth stuff and delete that way. But we don't have time for that, unfortunately. But if you've coded along with this and had a go at it, I set that challenge for you to fill in this final bit where you create a booking and then you extract the booking ID from there. So that's it. That's just a brief hour of how I get started with working with API checking in Java. What's really fascinating about this is that actually it's more about the model of how to sort of put things together, how to frame everything, and you can actually apply this across a bunch of different languages. And what that means is that I've actually created a repository called API Framework, where basically the same approach has been applied across a bunch of different languages and different tools. So we've got one for Ruby, one for Python, one for JavaScript. We've got 2 for Java, so we've got the rest assured one that we've just done, but we've done another one with Spring MVC. And literally the difference is that rather than using rest assured as the library within the API files, I've used Spring, and that's it. And then we've got another one, C#, which Hillary created for me and added it, so shout out to her. That's it. I hope this was useful, and if you do have any questions, I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. Feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. I hope I am still live and that people can still see me, and that this was useful for people. We're living in strange times, and it's good to connect with people in lots of different ways. So what I'm hoping to do, so this is me with my sort of Dojo Boss hat on, is I want to extend an invite out to those of you who've been on this stream now or are watching this a little bit later. I'll also do some shout outs later, but I'd like to get more people doing this. I'd like to do more live streams back to back, people sharing lots of information. I don't really care what you do. It could be something automation focused. It could be just running a podcast with someone else, and just having a conversation with someone else for an hour. But I think that given that we're all going to be locked down for the foreseeable future, I'd love to see the opportunity to just basically have a bunch of people sharing stuff, talking about testing, engaging with the community in lots of cool different ways. So if you're interested, if you have some time, just want to give up an hour, give me a shout, and I can get you started and we can work together and do some cool stuff. But hopefully there'll be more of these from me in the coming future. So cool. I'm glad that it's useful for some of the people that have been viewing. So like I said, I'll leave this around. I'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone does have any questions about anything. If not, I will sign off in the next few minutes. And this is where I have to work out how to do the scene switching again in OBS. Hi. Perhaps maybe something for a future session is to look a little bit more at the approval test stuff and show you how that all works. My hope is that this recording will be on the dojo as well, and we'll chunk it up and we'll actually turn it into a course as well. So, if you want to do a quick course, but you don't want to go through all the rigmarole of like building a proper professional course, but would like to just share some stuff and get that on the dojo and earn some money from it as well. We do revenue streams and stuff like that as well. Again, give us a shout for that. But yeah, I think that's it. Okay, so I'm going to call it there. It's been an absolute pleasure doing this, and it seems to have gone all completely smoothly. So as a test, this has worked out all right. I will go back and listen. This will be on YouTube for a little while, so please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm going to give it some love, maybe give it a proper YouTube channel name rather than the weird string name that it has. But subscribe, click the bell. There'll be more live streams coming soon, and you can check them out and just have them running in the background as some people have been doing. But really, that's it for now. Check out the Ministry of Testing site for all sorts of cool stuff and ways to engage with Ministry of Testing in general. Follow us on Twitter at Ministry of Test. And yeah, hope to speak to you all soon. Catch you later. Bye.